Hi, it's Todd of Todd's Workshop here. Earlier in the summer, a bunch of us got together and we made a film. Will, Toby, Joe and myself made Arrows versus Armour, medieval mythbusting. Basically, the concept is to take the classic test that we all see, which is a breastplate, and shoot it with a longbow and see what happens. This film generated a great deal of interest and a great deal of comments. So we're coming back now to address some of those comments. They come in broad bands, so I'll just address the broad bands rather than any specific comment. So we're going to start by looking at arrows. So first up, there were a lot of comments saying, why didn't we use bodkins? We can only assume from that people meant needle bodkins. Now, needle bodkins are an earlier style of arrowhead that predominantly used against mail, as far as we could tell, and fabric armours. So they have a 60, 70, 80 millimetre long, narrow spike on the end. Really, they'd sort of more or less fallen out of use by the time of Agincourt. Short bodkins, plate cutters as they're often called, those are what we assume to be used against plate armour. That is what we used. Now, if you imagine a cold chisel for cutting steel, you don't use a chisel which is like a wood chisel with a very fine point on it. It will break. So what you use is a cold chisel. It's got a broad angle on it, an obtuse angle, and that allows you to get a cutting edge, not as good, but a cutting edge, but it stays intact when it strikes something. That's the idea anyway. Although you can see from the picture of our arrowhead that it didn't, it deformed. But again, the original that's shown below it also deformed. So, you know, like for like. But what we were using were appropriate bodkins, and they're based on a museum in London find from about a decade before Agincourt. Now, another point that was made is the arrows all break. They all break behind the shaft, and that loses the energy. So you're losing the maximum amount of energy that you could have that's carried in that projectile. You're losing it because it breaks and the shaft goes away. So you're not carrying the energy off and into the target. That is true. That is undoubtedly true. However, the arrow shafts that we were using were based on Mary Rose ones. The arrowhead that we were using was based on a Museum of London one. The two fit together basically perfectly. They're meant to go together, and yet they broke. So you can ask the question, well, why did they break? Because you're not imparting the maximum energy. Well, what you could see from that film is that when it strikes, it explodes and it shards in different directions. Some of that was slipping up towards the neck. The V on the breastplate stopped that. But again, if it hit your arm and shattered, and some of that was driven into under your armpit there, where again, maybe your mail arm is not so good or it's not tightly fitting. So there was a lovely response video actually from Metatron. And I'd like to say actually very good ones also from Schola Gladiatoria and from Shadowversity. But the Metatron one made a really interesting point, which is actually what happens is you're shooting at a guy 50 metres over there. The arrow strikes him and explodes. It is a lower grade shrapnel. The wood is not moving fast enough to penetrate armour, but it will still go through eye sockets. It will still go little shards into the breaths and things like that. It's gonna really annoy the knights on the other end. And you're always going to be in fear of one of those shards coming through your eye socket. So they really do have an effect. So maybe the fact that they are breaking and exploding on impact is not such a bad thing. Not if you're pretty sure you're not going to get through the armour anyway. It's a thought. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, and later films may come back for that. Now, why were we not using steel for the arrowheads? Because obviously if you're using wrought iron, which is softer than a steel breastplate, it's never going to get through. Well, never's a big word, but I entirely get your point. The thing is, we have no real evidence that they use steel for these arm-piercing heads. We wanted to rely on what we knew. We didn't want to try and get through the breastplate at all costs. If there was case hardening done on them, and they could do it, if it was done on it, would it provide an advantage? Well, we tried, we didn't seem to find an advantage. We're going to have another look at trying to improve our case hardening technique and try and get better at that, see if it helps. Toby has also had some discussions with Alan Williams, the guy who wrote The Knight in the Blast Furnace. Now, he is an expert in medieval metallurgy, and he's done work on bladed arrowheads that show that some of them do have steel blades welded onto a wrought iron socket. There is no evidence, as far as I know, that they did that with plate cutters, with short bodkins. But Alan feels they might have done. So we'll probably come back and have a look at that as well, because it references in old inventories that some arrowheads were steeled. We simply don't know what that means. Might be case hardened, maybe they had steel points. We'll come back and we'll look at that. Next up, let's talk about the armour. Now, we've been criticised because we chose a very high-end piece of armour. Well, it's not that high end. I mean, it's good armour. It's quite clearly good armour. It's steel. They were using steel at the time, but it's not heat treated particularly well. It's not massively embellished. So it doesn't strike me as being a very, very high-end piece of armour. Not the best available by any means. But also don't forget this particular thing of Agincourt. We were looking at the longbows shooting the knights on foot. Those knights were not just like random men-at-arms with like last year's breastplate. They were the creme de la creme of French nobility. They had the best armour. So we needed to choose a bit of armour that was, pretty good. We also had good stats on the Cherbourg 14 piece, so we were able to replicate it with some accuracy. That was also important for our aims within the film. Now the steel that we used, again, it would have been lovely if we had used a wrought iron based shear steel. Time and importantly of course money didn't allow that, so we had to use the best facsimile that we could. Of course it's not exactly the same as the wrought iron. Of course there might be soft spots and hard spots in a wrought iron version of it, shear steel version of it. But it's the best facsimile we could get. And what we didn't do was choose a 0.7 and then heat treat the hell out of it. We did what we told you we did. We used a 0.5% and we effectively annealed it. We just let it air cool. People have asked why didn't we shoot it from the sides, because it was thinner. Yeah, we would love to have done, but as it was, we had a full day of filming. We couldn't do everything. That is going to feature as part of further films. That is without a shadow of a doubt, quite possibly the next one up. Now the last one, which is very interesting here when we're talking about the armour, is how well did it protect you? So what you had is a breastplate, then you had effectively an air gap because nobody's chest is that sort of globular shape. Then you have the mail and the arming doublet underneath. Now the arrow, when it strikes, it carries 120 joules with it, or 130, something in that area. That's the kind of numbers we're talking about. That is spread over the whole chest. Now on a point loading, 120 joules is without a shadow of a doubt enough to kill somebody. But spread over your chest, is it? Does it knock you off your feet? Well, I would say no. A couple of short clips now. One is a guy who invented the soft bulletproof jacket, as far as I remember it, in the early 1970s. Shoots himself here with a 44 Magnum at point blank in a soft jacket. Clearly, he got a bit excited by the experience, as you would, but he survived. And he did it over 200 times after that, demonstrating his shirt. So blunt force trauma, I think he's probably frankly rather lucky to be alive, but through a steel breastplate, I don't think it's really an issue. Another little bit of video here from a bunch of Italians, quite clearly crazy ones again, shooting a ballistic vest with plates in it, with what looks to be, from the sights, an AK-47, so I don't know what the numbers are, 2,500 joules, 2,000 joules, at point blank, and the guy sways backwards, right? He's not flying through the back wall. Does it knock you off your feet? I'd say if you get hit by an arrow, no it doesn't. Blunt force trauma being an issue to your body, even after 20 hits? I'd say it's not there. Make up your own mind. Let's talk about the longbow. In the film, Joe shot a 160-pound longbow. Now that weight is a weight that he can shoot many arrows during the course of a day, which of course we needed for the filming. But the other thing that's important about it is, as we said, he can shoot a 200-pound bow. Why didn't we use that? Well, we didn't want to go through the armour at all costs. That's not what it was about. We had to choose equipment that was representative. The Merry Rose bows seemed to be averaging about 150, 160 pounds in draw weight, so that's a good place to start. Yes, it's 100 years later, but it's as good a data point as we've got. Did some people out in the field there shoot 200-pound bows? Probably did. If Joe can, some of them would have been able to. But as Joe said, he can't do it for that long before it's going to cause trouble for him. The other thing is that 160 or so seems to be a bit of a sweet spot with longbows. That you can go beyond that, but the efficiency starts to drop off. So the sweet spot, if you like, of work that the archer has to do to work he gets out at the other end, i.e. the ability to hit the knights, seems to be around the 150, 60, 70 mark. So that's why we chose that particular bow weight. The purpose of the test was to try and use real equipment doing a real job, so we could get an idea of what was going on. And to use a 200-pound bow, which doesn't really give you the returns and leaves you limited in other ways because you're unable to fight because you're too tired, we felt that that was just an inappropriate thing. And so we stuck on the 160 as a good weight that a longbow archer would have shot. Now, there's also comments about his shooting style, because Joe has what you might think is a peculiar shooting style, that he arches his back, he leans forward. Well, as he explained, he needs to do this this pose to bring in the different muscle groups to be able to draw the arrow, because it is no longer just about the shoulder. He's got to use his back and his lower back. That is how you do these heavyweight bows. So you look in the manuscripts, and again and again and again you see the same kind of pose. Now, I know that there is always artistic license in medieval manuscripts, but if you see this again and again, you have to conclude that there's something in it. And Joe cannot shoot his bow in the modern way. I shoot longbow. I cannot draw my longbow if I shoot it in a modern target way. I can do it if I shoot it like Joe shoots it. Now, if you are interested in that longbow archery, that heavy longbow archery that Joe's showing, go check his channel out, because he's got loads of videos showing him shooting different weight bows. Now we come to a few sort of more slightly random areas. One of the things that comes up again and again, why not use crossbows? Well, I love crossbows. I make crossbows. You know, I've done lots of videos with crossbows. This film was not about crossbows. It was about the longbow and the French knights. Another day, another time, we'll look at crossbows. But at the moment, we have got plenty of meat to get our teeth into on looking at longbows and how they affected the knights. People said, well, if the knight was on a charging horse, then he'd be coming towards the arrow and that would increase the velocity. Yeah, that's true. And the thing is, actually, you may not realise it, but the 20-25 miles an hour that the horse is coming is actually pretty significant when it comes to the energy that the arrow is carrying. So you could be talking another 20, 30, 35% extra energy that the arrow has. But we weren't looking at mounted knights. We were looking at men on foot. So another day, another test, but that wasn't this one. But it would, without a doubt, make a difference, and possibly a significant difference. And the last one of these real randoms was, well, if they didn't go through the armour, how did you win at Agincourt? Well, we didn't say it didn't go through the armour. We said it didn't go through that breastplate under these conditions. It's got to be a data point. It doesn't mean that they didn't go through armour ever. It doesn't mean that they didn't even go through low-grade breastplates. It means it didn't go through that breastplate. So that comes to, how did it happen? How did these guys get hit? Well, you saw how easily it went through the mail and the fabric at the beginning. Although not the best quality mail, it was pretty convincingly straight through that lot. So it can go in under the armpits. You saw how the splinters come up and under towards the neck, get knocked off the V. Well, if they come in just above the V, there's no V to knock them out the way, and those splinters are going straight up into the neck. Do they pierce the sights and the breadths of the helmets? There's all these things we simply do not know. Did the longbows play a massive and significant part? Yes, they did. Do we know exactly the part they played? No, we don't. But were they important? Without a shadow of a doubt. Now, the last aspect that I haven't yet mentioned are comments to do with the history of what occurred that day. Now, that is much better done by Dr. Tobias Capwell rather than Todd sitting in his field next to his shed. It is not, and I make no bones about it, my area of expertise. So Toby's going to do a separate film about that, to look at exactly what occurred on the day, in what sort of stages, and why we chose to go down the route that we did. But my understanding, the ground was in a very wet condition. An early cavalry charge was started, it was disrupted. The French then dismounted and they came on foot. And it was the ripping up of the ground by the cavalry and the wetness that caused the French a great deal of problems. That was then combined with the close quarter flat shooting of the English, as far as we understand it. And then, of course, the archers and the men-at-arms went in and finished off a lot of the French knights with hammers, mauls, maces, knives. And again, we'll have a look at how easy does a knife penetrate mail. You know, we'll have a look at these things. But we were looking at a very specific context. So beyond that specific context, I think we're best handing over to Toby. So we'll pick up that one in another film. Hopefully that has clarified some of our thinking behind the tests, about how we approached it, why we did it in that certain way, why we kept that focus on one particular moment in time. But of course it leaves the question of what happens next, because so many questions were unanswered. Does it go through softer, thinner armour? Does it go through the sides of the armour? Does it go through a helmet? Will it compromise the sights and the breadths of the helmet? Does the shrapnel go up under the neck? What is the effect of the lucky shots? It just goes on and on and on. We really want to address these films, and there will be more of these medieval myth-busting ones coming. Can't tell you quite when, but they will be coming. Thanks for watching, and I hope this has been a useful supplement to the original film. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It really is worth watching. Thank you.